Anyway, good morning. Listen, thanks for coming up so early. Today I'm going to be telling you some stories that I don't use in my show. I don't quite know which stories I'm going to tell you, but I'll tell you a few. Back in the year 1999, remember that? I went to a folk festival at Jamboree in the south coast of New South Wales. And I love going to folk festivals because you can wander around, you can see all the other singers and see all the great acts. And there was one particular presentation I really wanted to see. It was called The Greatest Song of the Last Millennium. And I thought, wow, that should be fun. So there's a lot of my friends, a lot of folk singers, they would come up, and as folk singers do, they would tell the story of their opinion, which the greatest song of the last millennium was. And they did this and they did that. And you know, every one of those folk singers got it wrong. Because for me, the greatest song of the last millennium comes with one of the greatest stories ever told. Now, John Newton was born in the year 1725, and he died in the year 1807. He left home when he was 11 years old because his father was a drunk and very abusive, and he ran away to sea with his uncle, and he joined a sailing ship as a young cabin boy. And he worked his way up, so after a while he actually became the captain of a ship. But this was not a good ship, it was one of the most evil ships ever, plying one of the most evil trades known to man, the trade of slavery. And you've got to understand about slavery. We're going to Brazil, where most of these slaves went. The Arab slave traders would go into the interior of Africa. They would capture whole villages of Africans. They would bring them to the coast. The slave traders would come down and they would have these auctions. They would buy these incredible amounts of slaves and they would ship them over to the Americas, where they would sell them for a vast profit. And when I say a vast profit, you've got to understand that one male African slave in good condition, and good condition rated in those days was actually standing up and breathing, would fetch the equivalent price of a four-wheel drive tractor today. There was millions of dollars, equivalent of millions of dollars to be made in this horrendous trade. And to maximize their profitability, they would jam as many Africans as they could on these slave ships, and they would sail them over to the Americas. And they would budget that 50% of their cargo would die on the way over the Atlantic. And they always said that you could always tell a slave ship because you could hear it, you could smell it from 4 miles downwind because of the insanitary conditions below. And also you could see it because there was always a school of sharks following these ships, because the dead Africans would be thrown over the side, and because the sharks knew there was free food on the way through. It was a horrendous trade. John Newton was the captain of one of these ships. He'd gone to Africa, he'd got his investors, they'd gone down, they bought a whole cargo of slaves, and they were heading out to the Americas to make their fortune with a full cargo of slaves. Halfway across the Atlantic, where we are now, suddenly a great storm arose, and the ship was in danger of sinking. John Newton walked out on the deck, and he smelt the terrible smell of the human misery below him. And he heard the moans of the men and the cries of the women and the young children before him. And he saw the raging storm. And he got down on his knees and he prayed to God. And he said, God, if you spare this ship, I will change things. The storm abated. The ship was saved. John Newton turned his ship back to Africa and he released his cargo of slaves. On the way back to Africa, after this epiphany, he sat down and he wrote some words on a piece of paper. These didn't become the greatest song ever written for quite a long time, actually. The words were bandied around. A lot of people put lots of different tunes. But in the same time that John Newton was in the middle of the Atlantic writing these verses, in the Appalachian Mountains, they were writing some incredible tunes. And there was one tune they wrote, and it was called New Britain. And 33 years after John Newton wrote his words in that cabin, the tune, New Britain, welded with the words of John Newton, and in my opinion, created one of the greatest songs ever written. I'll sing it for you now. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fear relieved. How precious did that grace appear when first I first believed. When we've been here 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see. In 1942, a young child was born in Louisville, Kentucky. And as he grew with the conviction that he was special, that he was good. It wasn't that easy to prove that, because growing up in the southern states of America in the 40s and the 50s was difficult if you were African American. But he believed in himself, and in 1960, he fulfilled a great ambition. He was part of the United States Olympic team in Rome, and he won a gold medal in his chosen sport. His chosen sport was boxing. He came to the attention at that time of some people who thought this kid was good. And a trainer knew this kid was good. And they formed a partnership which proved that he was good. He was the best. He was the greatest. His name, Cassius Clay, later to change his name to Muhammad Ali. Angelo Dundee was his trainer. He was the world champion. And then, because of his convictions, he had everything taken away from him. He was never beaten in the ring, but he had it taken away from him. And for a few years, he was in the wilderness. He almost went bankrupt. But he decided that he was going to come back and he was going to prove he was still a world champion. And that road to try and beat George Foreman in Zaire was a difficult road. George Foreman was a younger man. He was a stronger man. He was beating people in one round. Muhammad Ali was barely winning on points. When they got to Zaire, the rumble in the jungle, nobody believed that Muhammad Ali would ever come back. But one man never lost his faith, Angelo Dundee. And he proved he was the greatest. When Muhammad retired from the ring, he wanted to give his friend Angelo Dundee something very, very special. And he thought, I'll get someone to write me a song for my friend Angelo. So he looked around, he found a songwriting team in Nashville, Tennessee, Henley and Silber. He said, I want you to write me a song about my friend Angelo Dundee. So they came around, they sat around, and Muhammad Ali explained what it was like to be the greatest, and then have everything taken away, and then to have everything back, and have somebody believe in you. Henley and Silber went away with this idea. They wrote a song, and they came back, and they said, is this the song for Angelo Dundee? And he said, yeah, this is the song for Angelo Dundee. Now, you know this song in a different context, but that's the true story of this song, and this is the original version. Must have been cold there in my shadow. Never have sunlight on your face. You've been content to let me shine. You always walk one step behind. I I was the one with all the glory. You were the one with all the strength. Only a face without a name. I never once heard you complain. Did you ever know that you're my hero? Everything I would like to be. I can fly higher than an eagle. You are the wind beneath my wings. Might have appeared to go unnoticed. I've got it all here in my heart. I want you to know I know the truth. I would be nothing without you. Did you ever know that you're my hero? Everything I would like to be. I can fly higher than an eagle. You are the wind beneath my wings. Did you ever know that you're my hero? You're everything, everything I would like to be. I could fly higher than an eagle. You are the wind beneath my wings, my wings. You are the wind beneath my wings. A few years ago, I do a race called the Tom Quilty Cup, and it's one of the toughest races. It's a 100-mile race, and I've ridden it in every state in Australia. 100 miles one day. I had a great horse called Armistice. Armistice was a great horse, and one day I decided I was going to go down and I was going to give the Tasmanian Quilty a bit of a nudge along. So we put the horses, Armistice and another couple, in a truck, and we trucked them down to Melbourne, Port Melbourne, got on the ferry, and the ferry over Bass Strait can get really rough. Unfortunately, when we went over the Bass Strait towards Tasmania, we got caught in a really big storm. And poor old Armistice, not like me, he's not a good sailor. So by the time I got him off in Devonport, he was very unhappy. So we were there for a week or so, but he never really got back. He was just really nicked off. He wouldn't have enjoyed this ship at all. So, unfortunately, we didn't compete. I did one leg and he just wasn't happy, so I said, no, that's enough. I pulled him out. Now, it was an expensive job to take a horse down to Tasmania and compete in the Quilty. Now, the Quilty starts at midnight on Friday, and you've got 24 hours to do 100 miles. The following Sunday, so you finish on midnight Saturday. Yeah, midnight Friday, 24 hours. The following day on the Sunday, 11 o'clock, is the presentation. They give away the big gold cup and the silver buckles, and it's fantastic. And I was sitting there feeling a bit glum at 10 o'clock, an hour before the presentation. And I'm reading the program, and I see that they started this race in 1966, and the first 6 horses to win was Shilawi, Zigzag Jackass, Cindy, Stony, and Tumbalong. That in order. Shilawi, Zigzag Jackass, Cindy, Stony, Tumbalong. Wow, that runs off the tongue pretty good. And then I was speaking to one of my great friends, a fellow called Ron Bales. He knows more about horses. He's forgotten more about horses than I'll ever know. He's got 22 Tom Quilty buckles. A great horseman. And he was there right at the beginning with his stud, Ralvon. And I said, how did this all start? So it's about 10 past 10 at the time. And he said, well, Tom Quilty was a grazier up in the Northern Territories. And he was very good friends of a guy called R.M. Williams, who makes boots and hats. You might have seen very iconic Australian clothing. And R.M. was a Arabian horse breeder. And one day back in the 1960s, he was having a bit of a booze up with old Tom. And they got through a few beers, 4X. And Tom said, "Oh, you know, back in my day," he said, "back in the 1920s and the 90s, we had bloody good horses in those days, you know." He said, "We could ride 100 miles in a day, 100 miles in a day. We could, no bloody..." But he says, "Your bloody horses these days," he says, "bloody fat things," he says, "bloody go to shows, you know, they can ride 20 miles. And RM says, no, because RM was an avid horseman. He said, "No," he said, "look, Tom, get you." He said, "The horses of today are as good as the horses of yesteryear." Tom said, "No, they're bloody not." So I had a few more beers. And eventually, RM said, "Look, I tell you what, Tom, put your money where your mouth is. You put some money up, and I'll put a 100-mile race on, just north of Sydney." I said, "Well, okay, you're on. I'll give you £1,000. I'll give you with a lot of money in the 60s. Give you £1,000 if you can put a race on." So RM went to the RSPCA and the Arabian Horse Society, and they put a 100-mile race on. I thought, wow. Shall I zigzag jackass Cindy Stoney Lum? What a great story. I started writing this story at about 10:25. By about 11, the song just poured out. I finished it, and I rushed over to the tent where the presentation was. I said, stop. I said, "Before you start the presentation, can I sing a song I've just written?" And I got up on stage and I sang this song, and it was better than winning the Quilty, because this song has bought me free beers at any endurance ride for the last 30 years. It's called The Ballad of Tom Quilty. Old Tom said to RM, "I remember in my youth, man could ride 100 miles in one day, that's the truth. But it seems to me these days that fat horses are the goal, only fit for Sunday rides or going to a show." RM says to old Tom, "If we look around, horses with the spirit of the old days can be found, and riders with the guts and grit to ride through hell and back. You supply the money, I'll supply the track." Old Tom gave £1,000 to build a big gold cup. RM held a meeting just to get the riders up, and Ralph on marked the course down by the old Colo. Started Easter 66, so many years ago. Tom Quilty, your name will ever stand, as long as we have horses to ride across this land. Horses with courage and riders with guts will ride your course. God bless the horse and your old gold cup. Shall always zigzag jackass Cindy Stoney tumble on, and many other horses I won't mention in this song, 'cause everyone's a winner if you survive the course. So thank you stars, thank you God, but mostly thank you horse. Also thank the strappers, those who sit and wait. They light the fires, hold the rugs, put breakfast on your plate. They're really riding with you, and they pray that you'll get through. God bless you all, you strappers, 'cause we depend on you. Tom Quilty, your name will ever stand, as long as we have horses to ride across this land. Horses with courage and riders with guts will ride your course. God bless the horse and your old gold cup. From his station in the sky, old Tom looks down and smiles as he sees the horses muster to ride his 100 miles. By the spirit of this great land, they'll give it their best try. At the stroke of midnight, you can hear the riders cry. Tom Quilty, your name will ever stand, as long as we have horses to ride across this land. Horses with courage and riders with guts will ride your course. God bless the horse and your old gold cup. Will ride your course. God bless the horse and your old gold cup. Firefighters. We have a lot of bushfires in Australia, and it's a very great danger. They have them in America and in Canada as well, but they have some pretty crazy people in America. They're called smoke jumpers. And what they do, they go out in aeroplanes. They jump out perfectly good aeroplanes, and they land way out in the wilderness, and they fight the fires at the point. Back in 1949, a group of firefighters went out in North Montana to fight a fire in a place called Man Gulch. They were led by a guy called Wagner Dodge. They were fairly inexperienced, the whole team, because the whole of Montana was on fire at the time, and they just cobbled this team together. Fairly young people. They were aged from 18 to about 22. Wagner Dodge was a very experienced guy, though, so he was leading them. So they went over this area, out of the airplane, they jumped out, they saw Man Gulch, and they landed. It was about a 40-acre fire. So they came down to fight this fire. But something terrible happened on the way down on the parachutes. Suddenly, the fire jumped to the other side of Man Gulch and caused what they call a blow-up. It superheated the air in the middle of the valley, and suddenly the whole place exploded and went into about 7,000 acres. It was like an atomic bomb going off. And these guys, 15 of these guys, were coming down in parachutes towards this incredible inferno. When they landed, Wagner Dodge suddenly realized that there's no way they were going to fight this fire. It was just totally out of control. So he shouted to his men, drop your tools and get up that hill. Now the hill is about 40 degrees. And at that time, the temperatures in Man Gulch were reaching up to about 52 degrees. These guys had heavy firefighting gear on. They were told to drop everything and just try and make it to the top of the ridge where there was some rocks and try and get out of the way. They're heading up this incredible slope with this incredible fire behind them. Dodge looks behind him and he sees this fire is just approaching them at an incredible speed, and there's no way they were going to get to the top. And then Dodge did something very controversial. He lit a fire, an escape fire that went up in front of him, and he told his men to jump into the ashes of this fire and stay low. Now, tragically, most of the team just panicked and went around his fire, and they got caught in the main fire. The fire was so intense that when they found the 13 bodies, their clothes were completely blown off, and they were found about 100 feet in front of them. Dodge survived. When he got back, he was blamed for the death of his team, and he was made a pariah in the firefighting service. The stress of this whole situation, he died 5 years later of Hodgkin's disease. After that, they had another inquiry, and they found that Dodge not only was blameless, but if his team had listened to him and got into this escape fire, they would have been saved. And it's now become quite practiced to light escape fires. So this is a song about that. My name is Dodge, then you know that. It's written on the chart there at the front end of the bed. They say I'm blind, I can't read it. I've read it every word it says is death. So confession, is that the reason why you came? Get it off my chest before I step out of the game. Now you mention it, there are 13 things I'll name. 13 crosses high above the cold Missouri waters. August 39, North Montana. The hottest day on record, and the forest timber dry. Lightning strikes in the mountains. I was cruise chief at the jump base, I prepared the boys to fly. Pick a drop zone, C-47 coming low. Feel the tap upon your leg that tells you go. See the circle of the fire down below. 15 of us jumped above the cold Missouri waters. I gazed the fire, and I'd seen bigger. So I ordered them to Side Hill. We could fight it from below. We'd have our backs to the river. We'd have it licked by morning, even if we took it slow. But the fire ground jumped the valley just ahead. There was no way down, headed for the ridge above instead. Too big to fight, we'd have to fight that slope instead. Flames one step behind above the cold Missouri waters. Sky had turned red, smoke was boiling. 200 yards to safety, death was 50 yards behind. I don't know why, I just thought. I struck a match to waist-high grass, running out of time. Tried to tell them, jump into this fire. I said, we can't make it, this is the only chance you'll get. But they cursed me, ran for the rocks above instead. I lay face down and prayed above the cold Missouri waters. And when I rose like a phoenix, in that world reduced to ashes, there was none but to survive. I stayed that night, one day after, carried bodies to the river. Don't know how I stayed alive. 13 stations of the cross to mark their fall. I've had my say, I'll confess to nothing more. I'll join them now, those that left me long before. 13 crosses high above the cold Missouri waters. Oh, Shenandoah, I long to see you away, you rolling river. 13 crosses high above the cold Missouri shore. Okay, just a couple more. We had in 1942, there was a bombing of Darwin. Anybody seen the film Australia? I talked about this yesterday, didn't I? It was a great story. Pity they mucked it up with a good film, a bad film. But this is a true story of what happened in Darwin. Actually, more bombs fell on Darwin than fell on Pearl Harbor. And the reason why it wasn't so well publicized was the first thing that the Japanese, they're pretty canny guys actually, they came over and they knocked out the Post and Telegraph office, and that was the only line of communication that Darwin had at that time, down to Alice Springs and then down to the rest of Australia. So for quite a while, Darwin was completely isolated and being attacked by the Japanese. This is a true story. It's a song I wrote with my friend Smokey Dawson. It's called The Bombing of Darwin. In 1942, when Australia was at war, on a long, hard summer's morning, while testing out the line at the Post and Telegraph, Archie Halls heard an air raid warning. I'll call you back, he told his mates down the track. They were the final words he said, as the bombs fell down on Darwin town. Archie Halls and his teammates lay dead, and the bombs fell down on Darwin as the warplanes roared overhead, and the air raid sirens kept wailing as they mourned for Darwin's dead. And the bombs fell down on Darwin till there was nothing left of the town. And while Darwin wept, Australia slept. They hadn't heard, because the telegraph lines were down. telegraph engineer by the name of Harry Hawks, who survived that fatal day, managed to get a coded message through on a portable Morse relay. He hooked up to a line some miles out of town in a frantic race against time. That's when Australia heard fatal air raid news on the overland telegraph line. And the bombs fell down on Darwin as the warplanes roared overhead, and the air raid sirens kept on wailing as they mourned for Darwin's dead. And the bombs fell down on Darwin till there was nothing left of the town. And while Darwin wept, Australia slept. They hadn't heard, 'cause the telegraph lines were down. And the bombs fell down on Darwin. Okay. Well, I'm going to finish with one of my favourite songs about one of my favourite places. I hope you've enjoyed some of the stories I've told you. I spent a lot of my formative youth in America. I do genuinely love the United States of America. It's a fantastic place. It's so much variety. There's one place I really love, and that's Nashville, Tennessee. And I was there in the late 60s, early 70s. I was over there trying to learn my trade as a songwriter and as a singer. And there's one particular place, it's still there because my daughter went back there a couple of years back. It's called the Bluegrass Inn. And I used to love to go to the Bluegrass Inn on a Saturday night because that's where you had the best bluegrass bands in Nashville. By definition, the best in the world would come down and play. And there was one particular band that I really, really loved. And I loved it because there was a fiddle player in that band, and he was the best in the world. His name was Scotty Stoneman. He was part of the Stoneman family, and then he joined this other band. And he could do things with that fiddle that you just couldn't believe. But Scotty Stoneman was an alcoholic, and he used to get drunk. And then one Saturday he turned up to this Bluegrass Inn drunk. And so the band sacked him. This was a humiliation for Scotty because he was the greatest fiddle player in the world, and suddenly he got the sack. So he left. Now, the other night I used to like at the Bluegrass Inn was a Tuesday night, because what that was what they called an open mic night. They had 3 microphones on the stage. Anybody could come up and play. And a lot of the great session musicians who weren't working on a Tuesday night would rock up to the Bluegrass Inn, and you'd have this super band of incredible, the best of the best of the best. It was a great, and one day we were in the Bluegrass Inn. There were more people on stage than there were in the audience, about 15 people in the audience. And just Vassar Clements, Tut Taylor, Norman Blake, these guys were legends. They were the best. And then suddenly, halfway through the night, the door at the back of the bar opened, and in walked Scotty Stoneman, sober. He'd gone down the road, got another gig, but he'd cleaned himself up, got a new suit, a little brown suit, and never forget that, and a crisp white shirt, little black bootlace tie, and he walked in, and you could see where he go, oh boy, trouble. Because he'd just been kicked out of the Bluegrass Inn, but it was an open mic. What could you do? And he walked up, and he walked through the people as if they weren't there. And he walked over to the side of the stage as if the musicians weren't there. And he just put his fiddle down on the table, and he picked his fiddle up, and he walked up to the microphone. And he said, "My name is Scotty Stoneman, and I wrote this song. I call it The Train." And then he started to play. And he was playing with the gods that night. Almost like the devil was on his heel. He was doing things with that fiddle you just couldn't believe you could do with a fiddle. He was playing behind his head, between his knees. He was just rocking, and it just blew everybody off the stage. It was just amazing. And he went, bang, he finished. He didn't say anything. He just put his back to the audience, put his back to the musicians, walked over to the side of the stage, put his fiddle back in the case, and walked back out of the Bluegrass Inn. 2 years later, at the age of 42 years old, poor old Scotty died of alcoholic poisoning. Now, I was telling a dear friend of mine, a very good, Andrew Claremont, a very good fiddle player in Australia, about this story. And he said, wow. He said, that's an amazing story. He said, you know, Scotty never recorded much. He said, but he was the best. He said, but you were there the night that Scotty played. And suddenly, a little light bulb went off in my brain. So I'd like to leave you with this. Remember, stay around for the best show with the Syncopated Ukulele Orchestra. And this is called The Night That Scotty Played. Tuesday at the Bluegrass Inn. Quiet night, the crowd was thin when Scotty Stoneman wandered in. Said, I've come to play. The bottle had taught him how to lose. You could feel the anger coming through. Scotty had a point to prove, and he did it Scotty's way. There was tension in the room that night, 'cause there's people you just don't invite, but you got no choice when it's open mic. Scotty hit the stage. Scotty Stoneman is my name. I wrote the song called The Train. There was 40 years of life and pain in every note he played. It was over 40 years ago, but it seems like yesterday. You can say we were the lucky ones, but life can be that way. Sometimes you can say it all if you turn and walk away. I learned so much about my life the night that Scotty played. You could feel the engine start to roll from somewhere deep inside his soul. Scotty in complete control, he was the engineer. He just held the throttle open wide. The other picker stood aside. Give him room to play the lines that only he could hear. It was over 40 years ago, but it seems like yesterday. You can say we were the lucky ones, but life can be that way. His fiddle did the talking, and it had so much to say. I learned so much about myself the night that Scotty played. When Scotty finally hit the brake, we clapped until our fingers ached. But when you make the point you have to make, you don't need the applause. He proved that he was still the best. He survived the toughest test. With that, he let the matter rest, and he headed for the door. It was over 40 years ago, but it seems like yesterday. You can say we were the lucky ones, but life can be that way. Whenever people get to me, I do it Scotty's way. I learned so much about respect the night that Scotty played. And I thank the stars I was in that bar the night Scotty Stoneman played. Thank you very much. God bless you. Thank you.